Hi, I'm Mara Webster with In Creative Company, and today I'm thrilled to be talking about the wonderful series, The Wheel of Time. We are joined today by showrunner Rafe Judkins, along with production designer Ondřej Nekvasil, costume designer Sharon Gilham, hair and makeup supervisor Davina Lamont, and VFX supervisor Andy Scrase. And Rafe, I wanted to start with you because I love how I've heard you describe that one of the things that you love to do in the series is to go with this idea of circular storytelling, and you do it both visually and through the narrative with this idea that characters are kind of constantly going through certain themes and certain obstacles, and then they kind of come back to having to deal with some of the similar things throughout the series, which we see, but they obviously deal with things in different ways each time they're faced with these same ideas and concepts because of the growth. And I was just interested in kind of how you and the writers' room really love leaning into this idea of circular storytelling in the series.
Yeah, it's something that's such a strong theme in the books, and it's something that feels nice in television too. Like you just get it's something you can't get from watching movies in the same way, and you can get from TV. And so being able to tell things that are like, we'll often try, even in the first season, just like telling the same story for the character in the pilot that we're telling for them in the season that is actually their story for the whole series is something that we're trying to do and try to find ways to work in, try to find ways, as we're getting deeper into the series now, ways that you can also flip that back on itself, and now the character is experiencing the same story but in reverse, or they're the antagonist in the story that they were previously like a protagonist in. And so it's just a fun way really for the writers to be able to tackle some of these stories and to keep hitting on the themes that resonate through these characters over and over again. And it's one thing that Robert Jordan did amazingly in the books is find ways to take these stories, and by telling them again, sort of deepen them and change how you feel about them. And so it's we're always looking to find ways to do it in the show too.
I love that. And Ondřej, in talking about the production design of the series, I was really interested in your process when it comes to building some of the much larger sets that take several weeks to come together, and the way in which you'll start to kind of map out and create a design with your team, and you'll have a construction team that start working and kind of building the infrastructure. But at the same time, you'll still be kind of finessing and figuring out some of the finer details as it goes along. And I was just interested in kind of that journey and that process with all of the teams involved, and particularly with the scope of the show.
Yeah, for us, what was important that actually each city or each area, as per the story, based on our map of the different places and different eras, has a completely different look. So I had like a different teams, and each team was focused on a separate set. So there was a team which was focused on a farm. There was a team which was focused on a Carhian, and a team which did Tarvalon, and another team which did that little village called Atuan's Mill. And we always like to put together a lot of reference pictures and get a look of it. And together with that, we did like the layouts and the models and all of that important stuff to get kind of impression about the size and scale. But it's always that kind of process that you are creating the look and thinking about the look and the design of it. And at the same time, you are thinking about, okay, how many weeks do we need to build it? How many, days do we need to dress it? And that's kind of always the continuing process. So I had these teams, and I always like a kind of jump between these teams. And I was like, we had separate meetings about each set, and we were kind of leading the set towards the final look with the different art director, different team of the designers, and that was the way how we kind of create the specific look for each city, because that was so important for me that people will kind of recognize where they are, and we are, because the story is jumping between the places, so we can kind of clearly say where we are and what we are, how different is that different city, and I hope that we were able to do it so the audience will understand. Now we move to another place, and now we are moving to another city.
Definitely. It's wonderful. And Sharon, in talking about the costumes, I wanted to ask you a little bit about the way that you think about structure and silhouette for different groups of characters, because I love how some of the characters have much more of kind of like a formal, rigid structure to their costumes, and it's based on character type. And then you have other characters that are moving through the world and kind of trying to find their place. And so you'll have much softer, flowier structures to them. And so I was just really interested in, when you're designing costumes, how that's such a central part of kind of finding the character's space and journey, and particularly with the fact that this show, it's not just the individual costumes, it's the fact that you have all of these wonderful groups that you're able to build in cohesion with each other as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think I did work closely with Ondřej in creating the looks for the sort of different nations, as they're sometimes called. So like Kyrian and the Shonshan and so on. And there was like a kind of an idea of a silhouette or a shape that was based on Robert Jordan's information from the books about the mix of cultures that each nation is. So, for example, Kyrian is French and Japanese. So I took like the idea of the Japanese kimono and French traditional costume for the women. So they had sort of big hoopy skirts with a kimono on top. And so that was one way of like really defining the look of a place, and using a color palette as well for all the different nations, so that it was easy for the audience to understand, like Ondřej said, and follow where they were going through and how those places changed. But also in the White Tower, you have all the Aes Sedai there, who also have a color allocated to each Aes Sedai group. And there's each Aes Sedai has a job and also has a color. And I took that sort of a step further with costume and fabrics, and used sort of different types of fabrics, like flowing fabrics for the blues, because they're the spies and they sort of move through the environment. And the whites are the architects, so they were sort of more streamlined and angular and straight. And then used green. With the greens I used jewelry as armor, because they are the warriors, but they're also sort of very flirtatious and sexualized, and they have two warders and so on. So it's, the Wheel of Time is such an incredible gift to a costume designer, because there's so much information from the books that you can then collate and elaborate on and play with. So yeah, it was an absolute mix all the time, but then trying to be very clear about your ideas and making sure that it was coherent and clear enough for the audience to follow.
I love that. And Davina, in talking about the hair and makeup in the series, I wanted to start out by talking about the hair, because I think the hair work and the wig work tells so much story for every individual character. And I know that you worked very closely with the cast, particularly, because it takes several weeks to construct a singular wig piece. And so I know you've had a lot of times working on the show where you'll be in touch with an actor several weeks out. You'll be kind of sharing specific designs of what it would look like for their character, and kind of going back and forth on those ideas. And so I was interested in how you kind of formulate those ideas and designs, and how you also work very closely in tandem with the cast on the show for this.
Yeah, I think I think to start off with, I have my chats with Rafe, mainly Rafe and the directors, to kind of get a feel of each of the genres that we're going into, whether it be Korean or whether it be the White Tower or whether it be the Shonshan. And then from there, I often like to work in hyper-realistic photos and concepts. So some of the actors that I work with, or characters that I work with, then I like to go back and do concepts for Rafe to get it improved on. And then I guess from that point, if we've got enough time, there are some times where I like to build a wig, or if I've got 4 or 5 weeks where I can build a wig, then that's obviously ideal. But there are certain instances where we just don't have enough time for that. So I have a selection of, I think we had, like 300 or 400 or 500, I don't know, wigs on rotation, basically, because we had a number of different, I'd have probably about 4 to 5 wigs per character. And when you look at the amount of characters that, we had to pull through on the entire season, there was a lot of characters that we had. And so from that point, you know, once the cast is being set, we've kind of got an element of where we want to go with the style of the wig or the hair. And then from that point, it comes down to who they've chosen as, you know, their character. And then I have, you know, my little number of, you know, different color wigs that I can kind of pull on. So, and then the creation starts, and that's the most amazing thing, because we don't know, you know, sometimes we don't know like 2 weeks out the ethnic of the character, or you know, where they've come from. So basically, that's where I try and have as many, I guess, things at my fingertips so that I can play. And that's the most, I love that part of building a character. And, you know, once the actor comes in and I give them some sort of idea of what is happening. And then once they sit in my chair, then that gives us our time to play and converse, and then go back to Rafe, and Sharon is definitely involved in that as well. And, you know, I call it, I'm playing in my sandpit at that point. It's fun.
It's wonderful. And Andy, in talking about the VFX on this show, I think one of the things that I find so interesting about it and the work that you and your team are doing is there's kind of two different scopes at play. You have the fact that the show is obviously seeped deep in the fantasy world, and you have elements of magic. And then at the same time, there's also the real world VFX. So sometimes you're taking a location or a space and you're kind of like extending that for the viewpoint, just because there's not enough physical space to build the entire world out on a soundstage always. And I was interested in just that aspect of having one side of VFX that's incredibly kind of like magical and fantastical, and then another element that's the more practical side of it on a show like this.
Yeah, it's kind of all within the execution of the visual effects themselves. As you say, it's kind of like a two-pronged angle with visual effects, where you've got the magic system of channeling, which, you know, obviously there's no real way of creating that in real life, as much as they'd like us to probably try. You know, so I think it's a case of your execution of the work, you know, creating a really nice visually looking image. And then as the other side is, say, the environments, that's more where you move into the seamless work, as would consider it in the visual effects industry. And that's where the viewer really can't tell what's digitally been added to a shot. And I think probably in our first conversation I had with Rafe, we spoke about this, where you know, you make the seamless visual effects as seamless as possible, so no one knows. And then those are kind of more bigger moments, especially with the channeling. It's more of a kind of a wow moment for the audience. So yeah, 2 areas to sort of figure out, and I think we're pretty successful with both of them.
You are. And Rafe, in terms of talking about the source material of the books, it's so clear every time you talk about the show how much of an affinity and how much of a passion you have for the books. And I was interested in, when you were starting work on the second season, how you were thinking about the source material, because you've always kind of been a little bit fluid as well, in that it doesn't have to be season 1 is fully book 1, season 2 is fully book 2. You're kind of looking at what makes the most sense in terms of the narrative structure of the show and the story that we want to tell. So for example, this season, having certain elements that are coming in from the third book, even though it's season 2 on screen. And I was just interested in how you work so closely with the source material and really just find those little plot points book to book that make sense each season.
Yeah, I mean, you know, I love the books and had read them all years and years ago with my mom. And a lot of the writers come to it from different perspectives. Of some of them have also read all of the books beforehand. Some of them had read some of them, but fallen out in the middle. Some of them had never even heard of the Wheel of Time before they came to the show and started working on it. So it's good because we can come at it with a number of diverse perspectives and see how best to take the story that's there, that's so amazing, and the characters that are so incredible and have such huge journeys, and then find a way to bring it to television. In some ways, it could be quite daunting because they're impossible to adapt. They're like famously impossible to adapt, but it's actually freeing in some ways for us, because we do know we have to find ways to reconstruct what's in there, because we can't do 15 seasons at 18 months to 2 years a season. All our, she'll be 55 when we finish the show. So, we have to find these ways to sort of break and take. And I really think of it always, and all of us do, as an adaptation of the entire series, The Wheel of Time, as opposed to adaptations of the individual books. And so, even working on season 3, there are elements that are coming from book 1 back into season 3 now, because it's an important element of the show, but it wasn't important to the storytelling in season 1, but now it is. And so we are the most bang for our buck with the characters of like, if a character is just introduced briefly and doesn't have a big impact on the overall story, we will usually wait and introduce them at a moment when the impact they have on the overall story is huge, and then try to weave in any moments that were important to that character, when they come in and have this big impact.
Definitely. And, off the back of that as well, for the rest of you, it sounds like throughout the process for everybody involved that it's not just a case at looking at the scripts, but it is also looking back to details and visual descriptions in the books. And it sounds like there's a lot of care taken to make sure that this is a show that really aligns for people who have been so connected to the books and thinking about, how would their imagination build what's on the page as well. And so I just wanted to ask you all a little bit about the way in which you also work with the source material for a lot of the visual details in building this entire world out on the series.
Okay, I'll start. Well, as I said earlier, there is so much information in the books for the costumes. It's incredibly detailed, which is really, really rich for a costume designer to use all of that information. And then, you've got the cultural mix and the information, the details from Robert Jordan. And then, for example, like with the Shanshan, then you start to interpret what that means. And the Shanshan is a mix of Mesoamerican and Imperial Chinese. So you've got like the sort of armor and so on comes from there, and the Mesoamerican side comes from the color palette and some use of feathers and so on. And then you start to develop those ideas. And Robert Jordan also mentions that they look like insects. So I took that and then what about reptilian? And all of these things start to grow and develop as you start to create these worlds that are totally original, really, because they are such a mix of things. And I think that the books are such a rich starting point. But then you're encouraged, and we're all encouraged by Rafe to then just play and experiment and go for it and try new things, and to create things which feel, quite original for a fantasy show, because you do have the fantastical characters like Lady Suroth, but you also have a lot of reality. Rand in the Foregate that's a very gritty, real place. So I haven't read the books, I have to say, because I've read the bits that I need to read, because the scripts are quite involved as well. But I can feel how, and I understand the passion that people have for the books. And I want to be as true to that as possible, and to make people, and hopefully help people to believe in our version of The Wheel of Time as an adaptation.
And I think that this team, like the you have here now too, they work together in such an incredible way that I haven't seen a lot on television shows before, of like, we are truly creating worlds, and there's all this richness in the books about what those worlds are, but then they take it and they work together, and Sharon's got a color palette that's really pinging and everyone's getting excited about. So Ondřej takes that color palette and puts it into the world and the buildings and the fabrics of the space. And then Davina is able to take that and work off of it and put it into, what the Shanchan's faces look like and how their hair fits into this Mesoamerican Imperial Chinese thing. And then Andy with the VFX is also leaning into that, and like, can we have, he came to me and was like, can we have the women who channel in the Shanchan world, can the channeling move differently? Maybe it's tighter, maybe it's more controlled, it's more weapon-like. And so all 4 of them are bouncing off of each other, bouncing off of the books, bouncing off of me, bouncing off of the actors, to like a whole group of us come together and create these worlds, so that when you drop into them in the show, they feel real and they feel fully experienced, from, you know, the way the extra in the corner has done her hair to the knife the guy is sharpening. Every piece of that world feels part of a whole.
It's amazing. And Davina, was there something that you were going to add there as well?
Oh no, just to carry on from what, you know, Sharon and Rafe were saying, is that, you know, we dive deep into the scripts, and then from there we, you know, we have our meetings and start the concepts and start developing. And you know, with Leandrin and where she comes from Tanchico, it you know, in the books it would say that she had many different braids. So I try and add those. Well, I need to be able to add those into each of, you know, basically her and where she's come from. And then when it came to Sauroth, you know, Sarah Nakamura gave me a lot of information to do with the Shonchan. And with her, with Lady Sauroth, it was the nails were one thing that I read that she'd given me, as well as shaved on both sides of her head. So and from there I was able to create you know, my starting point and to add all the other elements into it. And you know, Rafe is so great that he gives us so much freedom to be able to expand our brains and our creativity, which, you know, and I keep saying to this day, it's just been the most fun and creative job I have ever been involved in. So, you know, we don't get that chance often. As a makeup designer, you really don't. Sometimes you have to follow a palette, and Rafe is excited with, you know, what it is that we bring to the table.
It's great. And Andy, because, you know, Rafe was talking a little bit about the channeling and how that looks a little bit different in terms of flow and what that looks like on screen. You know, there's also the added element of, depending on if it's like a female character or a male character, like the coloring being a little bit different as well. And I was interested in how you and your team kind of first set about figuring out what that was going to look like, because I think, again, it also has to align with the character and the actor's performance, as well as just visually what you think would look best on screen as it channels.
Yeah, channeling isn't, maybe it's because I'm working on real time, but it's not your average magic system. It's very in depth. It's got many layers. I actually joined the show late, kind of 3/4 of the way through the shoot, so I had to play catch up and do a crash course almost. I say crash course because I put on the audiobook for Eye of the World when I knew I was coming onto the project, and it came like 28 hours. So once I picked my jaw up off the floor, I realized, you know, I might not be able to just rely on the books itself. So there's a lot of material looked at, even content creators online. There's a lot of material out there. And Davina said we had Sarah Nakamura, who's our book expert, who's a really good source of information for me. So it was kind of taken all those, and channeling was definitely one thing I wanted to look at for season 2 in my mind before I'd even have a discussion with Rafe. And it just happened, Rafe Webster wanted me to kind of re-explore that. So I was quite literal in the books, very much still kind of very textile based with the way it's described, with threads and weaving and things like this. And as I was looking through for reference for it, I came across a photographic technique of light painting, which seemed really thread-like in the way it looked, visually very striking, and could be quite beautiful. And I think that's something that definitely exists with this magic system. There's a certain amount of beauty as well as power with it. So that was sort of my big inspiration for us with our channeling. And then the introduction of colors as well was pretty important to me, because that's a big part of the books, and it allows you to define your different elements of channeling, that fire, air, water, spirit. And I think, you know, in a sort of battle scenario, colors are a great way of describing very quickly to the audience what's being used in that particular moment to create a certain one power event.
I love that. And Ondřej, in going back to talking about the production design, it's not just the fact that you're building these incredible sets on all of these sound stages, but you also have to think very specifically about what is the story that's happening in this space. And on a show like this, sometimes there's elements involving fire, involving a lot of water. And so you have to think about how that's going to impact the sets that you're building, but also, you know, what's going to happen the next day. If we're going to have a massive scene with loads of water or loads of fire, you know, what does the functionality of this space need to be the next day in order for the scenes that we're shooting then? And I was just interested in some of the challenges that come with that for you and your team as you're imagining these worlds.
Yeah, so we had like a few moments that we have to deal with the fact that we are showing one world. Let's say, there was a Carhian that area in front of the gate, that four-gate area, which was kind of like a kind of medieval slum, I should say, where Rand was living there. And we know there's a building which has to, catch the fire. So we have to think about that. We have to think about that, how to do it in a schedule-wise, because we have to do like the scenes before the fire, during the fire, and after that aftermath. So we have to always go out, go back, and we have to kind of schedule how many days do we need to rebuild it. And the same thing with the interior, because we had like the scene which was set inside a very basic shed, and suddenly we need a fire in that shed. So it was kind of tricky and has to be prepped by the special effects. So that was always like a kind of schedule things which we have to kind of deal with and really think like how many days do we need to revamp that set to something else, as well as the the look of it, and of course for the shooting purposes, like a safety of the crew and the cast, of course, because so that was kind of challenging thing, mostly the four-gate area with the fire, because the four-gate was really always like a wood and old wood and the reefs and like a really very like a basic materials, and there was no way to really do proper fireproof for that. So what we had to do, that we have to kind of bed it down everything the day of the fire, and be sure that we are really not hitting anybody by that. And the same thing with like that we had a scene, before the battle, after the battle, and there was just like a few moments for that, and that we had like there was the Atuan's Mill, for example, that we had like an arrival to the quiet village, and after we had like a big battle scene with a lot of stunts and a lot of special effects and stunt fireworks. And after we have to go always like clean in for the situation after the battle with the dead bodies, like a broken buildings and stuff like that. So yeah, we have to always deal with the fact and find a way with the ADs how to put it together into our schedule, because sometimes there was a request to do fight after the post fight, so we have to do like a post fight first, and after you have to go back to the fight scene and stuff like that. So
for Ondřej, we're always like, oh, can we shoot this part first, and then we go back when it was whole, and then maybe it needs to be burned again for a day, but then back to whole, and then the whole thing needs to be underwater next week. And he's like, okay.
We have to deal with that element of the sets, but it was fun.
I'm glad it's fun. It's very impressive. And Rafe, when you step back and you look at the scope of this show, it's absolutely incredible what you and this team here and the rest of the team accomplish. And at the same time, at its heart, at its core, it really is this intimate character exploration for all of the central characters throughout the show. And that's really what connects people at the end of the day. And I was interested in how you said about telling a story in a way that has the scope of a show like this, but yet also still feels very intimate at the same time.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of the things I talked about from when I first pitched the show, was that the reason people come back to fantasy books over and over again and read 15 of them is because they want to be with those characters. They want to see what happens to them. They want to see where they go. They want to go to new worlds because they're going into them with our characters. And so we always try to stay true to that in the show. You'll see that you're almost always experiencing a new world with one of our characters, so that like as they are taking in these incredible new costumes and buildings and everything, that we're with them, as opposed to it's a postage stamp that we as the audience are supposed to be impressed by. If our characters are impressed with the world, then we can be allowed to enjoy it and be impressed by it too. And so if we do that, then it lets us sort of blend the intimate and the scope at the same time. And so you watch the show and almost don't realize at moments how massive and incredible the world is around them, because hopefully you're so close to and worried about what our characters are worried about that you're just on this journey with them.
And the work that you all do on this show is absolutely incredible and breathtaking on screen, and I really, really love it. So thank you for the opportunity to talk to you all about it today. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you so
you.
much. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.